There is a hidden economic truth that most people miss. The next financial crisis has a scheduled start date. It is not a prediction. It is a signed policy document that goes into effect in exactly 21 days, January 1st, 2026. While the mainstream media told you to celebrate the trade truce in November, they were feeding you a carefully constructed lie. The trade war didn't end. It just went underground. While you were watching the headlines about gallium and germanium, Beijing quietly signed the death warrant for the American silver market. They gave us the pawns to capture the queen. Because on New Year's Day, the open market for silver ceases to exist. It is being replaced by a state-controlled licensing monopoly designed to choke the U.S. economy at its most vulnerable point. If you think this is a conspiracy theory, look at the government's own actions. On November 7th, just 1 week after the trap was set, the U.S. Geological Survey panic added silver to the critical minerals list for the first time in history. That wasn't a coincidence. That was a confession. They know the supply line is being cut. They know the price you see on your screen right now is a ghost. And they know that when the clock strikes midnight on December 31st, the real panic begins. To understand the trap, we must first reconstruct the scene of the crime, Busan, South Korea, last month. When President Trump met with Xi Jinping in November, the diplomatic theater was executed with Hollywood precision. The cameras flashed, hands were shaken, and the global financial press breathed a collection of sigh of relief. The narrative was set. De-escalation. Headlines across Wall Street celebrated the trade truce. Market analysts rushed to declare that the resource war was cooling off. The optimism seemed justified. Reuters reported that Beijing had officially suspended export controls on critical minerals like rare earth elements, gallium, germanium, and even antimony. The S&P 500 rallied. The algorithms bought the news. The West believed it had won a concession, but they were looking at the wrong hand. In intelligence circles, this is known as a head fake. You sacrifice a pawn to protect the king. China gave concessions on minerals they could afford to lose. Gallium and germanium are tactical. Supply chains can eventually route around them, but while the world cheered the return of these minor metals, Beijing tightened its grip on the one strategic asset that matters most for the energy transition: silver. The restriction on silver remained absolute, hidden behind the noise of the truce. The market tried to warn us, but few were listening. Silver is currently trading at $62 per ounce, up 115% since January 2025. The all-time high of $61.94 has been shattered. Yet mainstream commentary dismisses this as speculative fervor or a side effect of inflation. They are missing the structural reality. This isn't a normal rally driven by investment demand. This is a siren. It reflects a market that smells smoke but hasn't found the fire yet. The Busan Truce was designed to keep that fire hidden until the exit doors were locked. The proof of this deception is not found in what politicians said, but in what ships carried. We need to examine the shipping manifests from October 2024. In that single month, just weeks before the new rules were whispered, China exported 660 tons of silver. This was an all-time historical record. A naive economist looks at that chart and sees robust trade or supply meeting demand. A forensic accountant looks at that same chart and sees something very different. An evacuation. This was not commerce. This was capital flight masking as trade. Chinese exporters, the insiders who knew the policy shift was imminent, were not selling metal, they were moving it out of jurisdiction. They emptied their warehouses onto vessels bound for London Metal Exchange vaults, New York COMEX depositories, and Swiss refineries. They were front-loading every ounce possible before the regulatory window slammed shut. They understood that after January 1st, the freedom to move capital in the form of silver would be revoked. The October surge was the equivalent of the last commercial flight out of a war zone before the airspace closes. And the timing reveals the malice. Why did Beijing choose January 1st, 2026 as the implementation date? It wasn't an arbitrary calendar flip. It was a precise tactical strike geared toward Western vulnerabilities. First, it maximized the psychological impact of the November negotiations. By timing the restriction to hit after the diplomatic high, they ensured Western guards were down. The misdirection was brilliant. Give them what they expect so they don't notice what you keep. Second, and far more damaging, is the corporate calendar. January 1st is the exact moment American manufacturers, from solar giants to medical device makers, finalize their Q1 procurement contracts. These companies lock in orders in mid-December for deliveries in January, February, and March. By springing the trap on New Year's Day, Beijing guarantees chaos. The approved exporters list won't even be published until late December. This leaves U.S. buyers with signed contracts but no legal counterparty to fulfill them. They have zero advance notice to pivot. They cannot call Mexico or Peru and replace 40 million ounces overnight. The system was designed to let American industry sign the papers, only to realize the ink is worthless. The Busan Truce was never about peace. It was a stalling tactic. It bought Beijing time to secure their domestic stockpiles while convincing the West to lower its shield. The deception is now complete. The evacuation is over, the ships have sailed, and American industry is left holding a contract for a metal that is no longer for sale on the open market. You have seen the deception, but do you understand the weapon they are using to enforce it? It is not a ban, and it is not a tariff. It is a bureaucratic mechanism hidden in plain sight, and it makes the open market illegal. Most Western observers are still waiting for a headline that says China bans silver. They will never see it. A direct ban is a crude instrument. It invites immediate World Trade Organization disputes, retaliatory tariffs. They have replaced the open market with a licensing monopoly. The instrument of this takeover is MOFCOM Notice No 68, officially issued on October 30th, 2025. To the untrained eye, it reads like a standard regulatory update on export compliance, but when you strip away the administrative language, you find a carefully constructed filter designed to seize absolute control of the supply chain. We need to dissect the specific requirements within this document to understand why the free trade of silver effectively died the moment the ink dried. Requirement 1. The production floor. The notice mandates that any entity applying for an export license must demonstrate an average annual production of 80 metric tons or more. There is a slight variation allowing for 40 tons if the operation is located in Western China. A strategic move to incentivize development in the interior, but the 80-ton standard is the iron gate. Consider the scale of this threshold. Silver mining is notoriously fragmented. Hundreds of smaller miners and independent trading houses facilitate the global flow of metal. They provide the liquidity and arbitrage that keep prices efficient. By setting the bar at 80 tons, Beijing has immediately disqualified the vast majority of private operators. Small miners, independent refiners, and agile trading firms are erased from the chessboard. The only entities capable of meeting this volume requirement are massive conglomerates. Specifically, state-owned enterprises like Zhejiang Mining and Henan Yugang. The market has been consolidated from hundreds of participants down to a handful of giants who answer directly to the party. Requirement 2, the financial firewall. If a private company somehow manages to meet the production quota, they hit the second wall. Applicants must demonstrate available credit lines of 200 million URMB. That converts to approximately 28 million US dollars in liquid financing. This requirement has nothing to do with preventing fraud or ensuring financial health. A silver exporter does not need that level of standing credit to ship containers of metal. This is a political filter. In China's banking system, credit of that magnitude is almost exclusively reserved for state-owned enterprises or companies with deep government alignment. Private operators, even those with perfect track records, are systematically denied this level of liquidity. By mandating this credit threshold, MOFCOM ensures that no rogue exporter can operate outside the state's financial oversight. Requirement 3. The time lock. The document requires documented export performance from 2022 through 2024. This is the grandfather clause that welds the door shut. If a company was not already exporting silver at a significant scale during those specific years, they are barred from entering the market now. There will be no new entrants, no innovative startups, no foreign joint ventures trying to bridge the gap. The list of players is frozen in time, protected from any competition that might disrupt the oligopoly. The result of these 3 filters is not regulation, it is consolidation. We are looking at a future where fewer than 20 enterprises across the entire nation will hold the legal right to move silver across the border. Every single one of them is structurally tied to Beijing's strategic objectives. For the American buyer, the reality has shifted tectonically. If you are a purchasing manager at a US solar panel manufacturer or a tech giant like Apple, your procurement process has fundamentally changed. Yesterday, you could negotiate with the market based on supply and demand. You could pit suppliers against each other to find the best price. Starting January 1st, that leverage is gone. You are no longer negotiating with the supplier. You are petitioning a state agent. You will deal with the approved list, or you will not deal at all. These licensed exporters do not answer to shareholders or market forces. They answer to MOFCOM. They can throttle supply, delay shipments, or demand premiums based on political directives, not economic logic. The open market where price discovers value is dead. It has been replaced by an allocation queue where access is a privilege, not a right. Now that you understand the legal cage they have built, we must look at the physical reality it is trapping. The bureaucracy is terrifying, but it is the cold mathematics of the global inventory that guarantees the coming shortage is unsolvable. We must now step away from the politics and look at the physics. Politics can be debated, propaganda can be spun, but mathematics is ruthless. It does not care about trade truces or diplomatic handshakes, and the mathematics of the global silver market was already broken before Beijing signed a single document. To understand the magnitude of the coming collapse, we have to look at the global balance sheet as it stands today. According to the latest data from the Silver Institute, total global demand for silver in 2025 sits at approximately 1.2 billion ounces. This figure is an aggregation of every sector that keeps the modern world functioning. It includes 750 million ounces for industrial applications, the chips in your phone, the contacts in your car, the panels on your roof. It includes 200 million ounces for investment demand, 180 million ounces for jewelry, and 70 million ounces for silverware. Against this ravenous consumption, the planet is not producing enough metal. Global mine supply generates only 985 million ounces annually. Even when you add the secondary supply from recycling, stripping old electronics and melting down scrap, which contributes another 175 million ounces, the total supply ceiling is 1.16 billion ounces. Do the subtraction. The world is running a 40 million ounce deficit. We are consuming more than we existentially possess. This was the baseline reality before any export restrictions were introduced. The market was already bleeding inventory just to keep the lights on. Now, introduce the China variable. China is the world's 4th largest silver producer, but more importantly for the West, it is a critical processing hub. Annually, China exports approximately 4,200 tons of silver. Converted to the standard trading unit, that is 135 million ounces flowing from east to west every year. This flow is the lifeline that has kept Western deficits manageable, but starting January 1st, the licensing monopoly throttles this flow. We do not need to assume a total blockade to see the catastrophe. Let's assume a conservative scenario. The new state trading system, prioritizing domestic factories, reduces export approvals by just 30%. That is not a shutdown, it is merely a tightening. Yet that slight turn of the valve removes 40 million ounces from global supply. Combine this new loss with the existing structural deficit, the global market is now staring at a total shortage of 80 million ounces. That is 7% of total global demand vanished overnight. In any commodity market, a 7% gap between supply and demand does not lead to a 7% price increase. It leads to a parabolic repricing as buyers bid frantically for the remaining 93%. This crisis is compounded by a physical property of silver that distinguishes it from every other monetary metal: irreversibility. When gold is sold, it moves from a vault in London to a vault in Shanghai. It is never consumed. It always exists above ground. Silver is different. Unlike rare earth elements, which can technically be recycled from magnets, silver used in industrial processes is often burned. When silver is turned into conductive paste for a photovoltaic cell on a solar panel, it is fused to the silicon. It is not economically recoverable. When it is used in medical bandages for its antimicrobial properties, it is discarded after use. There is no circular economy for the majority of industrial silver applications. Once it enters the factory, it is gone forever. The deficit cannot be filled by melting down old stockpiles indefinitely because we are literally destroying the metal to build our green energy infrastructure. And this leads us to the final indisputable reason why Beijing is locking the gates. They are not just attacking us, they are saving themselves. China's domestic industrial consumption has hit 5,200 tons annually. Their solar panel manufacturing alone devours 3,500 tons of that total. Yet their domestic mines only produce approximately 3,600 tons. China is running an internal deficit of 1,600 tons every year just to supply its own factories. They have been filling this gap through imports and aggressive recycling, but the math has reached a breaking point. They can no longer afford to export what their own strategic industries desperately need. They are prioritizing their solar manufacturers, their EV battery producers, and their 5G infrastructure over ours. The wall being built on January 1st is a dam designed to keep their domestic industrial base flooded with liquidity while the rest of the world dries up. The math proves the shortage is inevitable, but you don't have to wait for the data to see the panic. It is already visible in the behavior of the banks. While the public price remains calm, the signals flashing from the physical vaults tell a story of a market that is already broken. If you want to know what is about to happen, do not look at the spot price ticker on CNBC. The spot price is a lagging indicator. It reflects the paper market, where contracts are traded in infinite supply. To see the crash before it hits, you must look at the physical market, the actual metal sitting in the vaults. And right now, the physical market is screaming a warning that hasn't been heard in over a decade. The smart money, the insiders, the industrial conglomerates, and the sovereignty-focused banks have already begun their accumulation. They are not waiting for January 1st. The evidence is visible in the rapid draining of global stockpiles. Let's start at ground zero, the Shanghai Futures Exchange, China's primary trading venue. As of today, registered inventory in Shanghai warehouses has collapsed to just 780 tons. To understand how critical this is, you need context. Back in 2019, before the solar manufacturing boom accelerated, those same warehouses held over 2,400 tons. That is a 67% drawdown in just 6 years. The buffer is gone. The safety margin has been consumed. And this isn't just happening in China. It is a global phenomenon known as inventory separation. Freely circulating silver inventory, metal available for immediate commercial transaction and not locked in ETF vaults, has fallen below 4,000 tons globally. In normal market conditions with healthy liquidity, you would typically see over 15,000 tons of readily available metal. The world is operating on fumes. But the most terrifying signal isn't just the quantity of metal, it's the cost of borrowing it. In the precious metals market, the lease rate is the heartbeat of physical stress. In a stable market, the cost to lease silver is virtually zero. It normally hovers near 0.5% or less. Banks are usually happy to lend metal just to earn a tiny yield. That normalcy shattered in 2025. In March, silver lease rates in London spiked to over 15% annualized. By September, during peak supply stress, rates hit 30 times their normal levels. This is not a technical glitch. This is a distress signal. When lease rates explode like this, it means major banks and trading houses in Singapore and Zurich cannot source leasable silver for commercial transactions. Refineries are rationing allocations to longtime customers. Buyers are so desperate to secure physical metal now, before the January deadline, that they are willing to pay you serious rates just to get their hands on the bars. This is the behavior of a market that knows the window is closing. We have seen this movie before, and we know exactly how it ends. If you think I am exaggerating the impact of China's export restrictions, look at the rare earth crisis of 2010. At that time, China controlled 97% of the global rare earth supply. Beijing did not implement a total ban. They introduced export restrictions, quotas, and licensing requirements. The exact same playbook we are seeing now with silver. The result was instant financial violence. Prices for neodymium, critical for electric motors, skyrocketed 500% within 18 months. Dysprosium, used in high-performance magnets, went up 2,000%. Western manufacturers faced an existential procurement crisis. The U.S. scrambled to restart the Mountain Pass mine in California, which had been shuttered for years. But here is the dark twist that makes the 2026 silver crisis significantly more dangerous than 2010. Silver does not have a Mountain Pass option. You cannot just flip a switch and restart a silver mine. The average lead time for bringing a new silver mine from discovery to commercial production is 7 to 10 years minimum. You have to factor in exploration, permitting, financing, and construction. Furthermore, primary silver mines are extremely rare. Most silver comes as a byproduct from copper, zinc, and lead mining. You cannot simply produce more silver without flooding the market with base metals, which requires billions in capital expansion. The supply response is inelastic. When the price of neodymium spiked, the world eventually adjusted. When the price of silver spikes in 2026, the mines will remain silent for a decade. The supply cavalry is not coming. The warning signs are flashing red, the inventory is drained, and the lease rates are screaming, yet the timeline for the final collapse is fixed. We have precisely 45 days of chaos ahead of us, and the schedule for how it unfolds has already been written by the delay in the licensing process. We have analyzed the politics, the mechanism, and the math. Now we must map out the chronology of the crash. This crisis will not unfold vaguely over the next decade. It will unfold with the precision of a train timetable over the first 45 days of 2026. At midnight Beijing time, the current silver export rules expire. Up until that second, Chinese companies can still ship under the old open market system. But the moment the clock strikes 12, the gate slams shut. January 1st, 2026 marks the activation of the new state trading licensing requirement. From that morning forward, only the exporters on MOFCOM's approved list can legally move a single ounce of silver outside of China. The list itself, containing approximately 20 state-lent entities, will be published in late December. Western buyers will finally see the names of the few gatekeepers they are now forced to negotiate with. The real crisis, however, begins 2 weeks later. Mark January 15th, 2026 on your calendar. This is the standard industry deadline when U.S. manufacturers, solar panel companies, electronics giants, and medical device makers finalize their procurement contracts for the first quarter. They need to lock in supply agreements for production runs scheduled for February through April. In a normal year, this is routine paperwork. In 2026, it will be a bottleneck. The newly approved Chinese exporters will not have their licensing logistics, documentation systems, and shipping procedures fully operational on day one. Bureaucracy takes time. The first shipments under the new state trading system will likely be delayed by 2 to 3 weeks while these new processors are stress-listed and established. This creates a supply gap. American buyers who normally receive their January deliveries like clockwork are looking at late January or early February arrivals at best. That creates a 30 to 45-day void in the supply chain. For a just-in-time manufacturing economy, 45 days is an eternity. Western industrial users will have two choices: draw down whatever meager inventory they have left on hand, or panic buy from non-Chinese sources. And when U.S. buyers collectively realize they can no longer source spot silver from China because the open market has been replaced by state-approved allocation channels, the bidding war begins. They will aggressively bid up supply from Mexico, Peru, and Chile. But those mines are already contracted. They cannot simply divert metal to the highest bidder without breaking existing agreements. This is where we will see massive regional price dislocation. Silver in New York could easily trade $3 to $5 per ounce higher than London, simply due to logistical constraints and immediate availability. North American refineries will command premium prices because they eliminate the shipping time from overseas sources. So, where does the price settle once the panic initiates? The target price for Q2 2026 stands at $70 to $75 per ounce. Understand this clearly. That is not the spike price. That is the new equilibrium. That is the price required to balance a market with an 80 million ounce deficit. The spike price during the acute shortage phase, when desperate factory managers are bidding to keep assembly lines moving, could be significantly higher. The tragedy of this timeline is that the United States is powerless to stop it. We have allowed our industrial security to atrophy. The United States produces only 30 million ounces of silver annually from domestic mining. That represents a microscopic 2.5% of global supply. Even if we passed emergency legislation to double domestic production overnight, which is geologically and physically impossible, it wouldn't come close to offsetting the loss of access to Chinese exports. Furthermore, unlike the oil market where we maintain the strategic petroleum reserve to buffer against shocks, the United States has no emergency stockpile for silver. There is no backup plan. When the U.S. Geological Survey added silver to the critical minerals list and used the phrase vulnerable to disruption, they were not issuing a warning. They were admitting defeat. They admitted that the dependency problem threatens our industrial base, and they know we cannot fix it in 21 days. The timeline is set, the gap is unavoidable, and the price target is mathematical, leading us to the final question that defines your financial survival. The system has changed forever, and now we must confront the cold reality of what happens when the market wakes up on January 2nd, January 1st, 2026. That is the date China picked. not because it is simply the start of a new calendar year, but because it is the precise moment they formalize control over a metal the modern world cannot function without. It is the day US buyers lose direct market access to the world's largest silver exporter. The window is closing and the insiders have already moved. The smart money, the ETF buyers who have pulled 200 plus million ounces out of circulation this year, are not speculating. The banks paying 30 times normal lease rates to secure physical metal are not gambling. They are positioned now because they understand the math. They know that, unlike rare earths, there is no quick restart option for shuttered mines to save us. The United States produces barely enough to cover existing commitments, let alone absorb the displaced Chinese supply. The supply restriction begins in 21 days. The question isn't whether prices rise, the math guarantees it. The only question left is when the market wakes up on January 2nd to a closed door. Are you positioned for what comes next?